How's everyone doing? So, Strength Chat episode 47. Can't get my words out. Today, I have got a very special guest for you. Today, I am joined by Dr. Aaron. I hope I'm pronouncing his second name correctly. Horschig, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
He is a physical therapist, coach, a speaker, and author of the Squat Bible. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not so bad. What have you been up to recently? What have you been working on? What's been going on?
Man, just staying busy and loving life. So I work about 40, 50 hours a week as a physical therapist, working with injured athletes throughout the day, and then piece together minutes, hours at a time whenever I can find them to create content for Squaw University, and then try to find some time for my own training and weightlifting and spending time with my wife and family.
Okay, so just busy all around then.
Very busy, but I love it. So it's
Yeah,
definitely what I was put here to do. So I enjoy it even though I'm very busy.
yeah. So where is it you work then? How far is the gym that you work in, or do you have your own facility? How does that work?
Yeah. So I work at a place called Boost Physical Therapy and Sports Performance. It's only about 20 minutes from my house, so it's not too bad of a drive every morning. I do most of my training during the week at that facility just over my lunch period. So it's a little bit different way of training than I used to do when I was going up through high school and college, because most weightlifters, as you know, you spend 3 hours at the gym sometimes. So you have a lot of resting and lifting mixed together. So now I get about an hour for most of my training sessions. So it's a little bit different way of training, but I still try to do as much as I can throughout the week. And then on my days off from work, I go over to a place called Kansas City Weightlifting, or KC Weightlifting. And that's with my coach, Anna Martin, who has been in the sport of Olympic weightlifting for over 25 years, I believe
Oh
now.
wow.
So I'm very adamant that every coach should still have their own coach.
Yeah.
Just so you know, you always have a second set of eyes on you from those who are more experienced, just to give you a different set of opinions on the way things are going that you may not see yourself. So to make the invisible visible sometimes, because a lot of times I think that we can definitely still be blinded to things that we need to work on.
Oh, absolutely. I know I write programs, as a coach myself, and
Hmm.
part of it as well. I have written programs for myself, but you always think, oh, I'll leave that a little bit out, and I'll put this in. I know for me personally, sometimes I don't want to sit down and write a program for myself. I quite like having my training in the hands of my coach, and then
Yeah.
I'll send them the feedback and be like, look, we need to work on this, we need to work on that. And then I can put all my emphasis in coaching my clients as opposed to thinking about my training. As well.
Exactly. It can be very helpful sometimes.
So, for everyone listening who might not know your background and how you got to be in the position that you're in now, do you just want to have a little bit of a chat about your background in the training that you've done yourself, in the physical therapist, and bringing to life Squaw University?
Definitely. So I guess you would say it all sort of the journey with this all started off. I've always been involved in a number of sports growing up through high school, baseball, basketball, football. When I got into college was sort of where I ended those traditional team sports and started training Olympic weightlifting. So back in 2005 was my first competition in Olympic weightlifting. And I just sort of fell in love with the sport. I had always done that type of training and loved being in the weight room from an early age. But now to have it as a sport was a lot of fun. And I felt like it was, the perfect calling, because I'd always loved being in the weight room, but now I could be in the weight room, but also compete in the weight room kind of thing. So I always loved that. And I mixed that. I went to school for my undergrad for an exercise science degree, learning kinesiology, nutrition, biomechanics, sports performance applications with physiology. I really enjoyed that side of things. I sort of started merging along that strength and conditioning sort of path, and then ended up getting my doctorate in physical therapy, but still wanting to merge those two worlds. So I have, gone along the path of getting certifications and degrees in strength and conditioning and sports performance, but then also the degree in physical therapy or physiotherapy. So my goal was always to sort of merge the two together. And there's a number of people who have been doing it recently, but prior to that time, there was only a few people that really had tried to merge the physical therapy and strength and conditioning world. I mean, I think I can point to like Kelly Starrett was one of the big ones with CrossFit, with his mobility WOD. Mike Reinold was big in the baseball world. But there really wasn't a ton of people that had degrees in both fields and a deep experience in training athletes or being athletes themselves, and then sort of merging that into into the physical therapy world.
Yeah.
So that's really where I wanted to take my career, and have done so since out in Kansas City. In being a physical therapist and working with a number of athletes, there were sort of these deja vu like moments that continued to sort of pop up during my evaluations with athletes, to where I would be working with them no matter what type of injury, knee pain, hip pain, back pain, ankle pain. And during our initial evaluation, for an injury that someone comes to you and they don't necessarily know why their injury started. Obviously, after like a surgery, it's pretty simple. You had a surgery. This is where we're at. Let's go here. But after, someone comes to you and complains of knee injury or knee pain, you have to sort of be a detective and sort of figure out, well, why did that pain start? Well, during that investigation, evaluation process, I would always ask them to perform simple basic movements. One of them being a body weight squat. Take your shoes off, point your toes relatively straight forward, squat all the way down and hold it. And then on top of that, do a single leg squat, because I think the squat is also a movement on two and on one legs that a lot of times we always forget. Well, during that time, it was sort of like I said, this deja vu like moment, where time and time again, I was seeing these great athletes, no matter if you're, high school, middle school, college age, or professional, that they were unable of performing a great looking body weight squat movement. And even on top of that, even less were able to perform a single leg squat with even good quality without their knees wavering around, body parts collapsing and things like that. And it sort of dawned on me that as a society, we have almost conceptually rearranged our athletic priorities to the point to where the squat is only an exercise and no longer a movement. And when we have done this to such a degree, we have forgotten how to move well first, and have started to load problematic movement patterns. If you think about it, when someone's like, well, I've got squats today. Well, did you do any squats throughout your day? Did you ever sit in a deep body weight squat? Did you do a squat movement? Or did you only put a barbell on your back and then do the squat? What happens is that when you do that and you put weight on top of a problematic movement pattern, or a pattern that you do not first own yourself in your movement capabilities, you do two things. First, I think you set your body up for an eventual injury, because you're loading a pattern that is not controlled for to the greatest potential to what your body should have.
Yeah.
Second, I think you set yourself up for not reaching your true potential of what you could be capable of performance-wise. So I think you sort of have 2 points of view when you're coming from it. Again, the physical therapy world, meaning the strength and conditioning world, is that we sort of have these both points, to where if you're not doing good quality movement first, you're going to sort of hit pitfalls in both areas. So that's where Squaw University sort of came from, was the idea that we need to move well first. And then once we move well, let's lift some big weight. Let's put some weight on the bar and let's try to reach our true potential, but we have to move well first. So that's where Squaw University came from, and just sort of going about things in the way, I think, a little bit different than the way the strength and conditioning world and physical therapy world does things nowadays, which is, let me give you some information, maybe tidbits, and let me draw you in so you can buy my $19.99 ebook, or you can pay me all this money to do online personal training. My big thing was, I'm going to give away every piece of information that I've ever learned. And I'm going to give it to you in a way that you can hopefully understand if you don't have a doctorate degree. If you want, sure, you can buy my book. It's on Amazon.com. You don't have to. You can, if you wanted to find everything that's in my book, you could scroll through all my content and piece it together. It may take a little bit of time, but it's all out there, because in the end, my goal is that you win. I want John, who's growing up in the middle of London, who wants to be, who wants to squat 180 kilos, but his knee hurts. I want him to be able to do that. And one day, if he sends me an email and he goes, I read 5 of your blogs and did this exercise and I was squatting better and I didn't have back pain anymore, that email is more precious to me and worthwhile more to me than someone being like, hey, I bought your book. Now, I love it when I hear people say that, because, obviously, I wrote a book. It was a big accomplishment and took a long time. But I more so want to help people change their lives and do so to reach their true athletic potential. I sort of call it finding your true strength. When people say, what's true strength? There's obviously that quote by Socrates that no man should not find the true strength their body is capable. I think true strength is not only the ability to lift a lot of weights and find out potentially what your body is capable of performance-wise, but it's also the ability to do so for life. We shouldn't think that you should just lift big weights as a young athlete. You should never stop being an athlete. I want you to be squatting a barbell when you're 60 and 70 years old. And I think when we rearrange our priorities, again, getting back to that original thing where we had thought that the squat is an exercise before movement, when we rearrange our priorities to think that we need to move well first, then lift big weight, and then lift big weight for life and do so the correct way, I think we're going to change and sort of see this shift in how we view aging. I think you're going to see people walking around at 70 years old. They may not be moving as fast as 20-year-olds, but they're not going to be having to walk with a cane or put in a walker, or when their grandkid goes, hey, grandpa, can you come kick the soccer ball around with me? You're like, my hip's hurting today. They should be able to get up and do the things they want to do in life because they've treated their body the correct way and trained it and maintained it the right way. So that's sort of where Squaw University is, where it's going, and sort of my whole philosophy around it.
Yeah, I completely agree. The content that you put out there, I know I follow a lot of your stuff, and it helps me as a coach because I've done a sport and exercise science degree, but sometimes you lose that. You forget some of the stuff that you've learned, and some of the stuff that you put out there. It's like, I remember that. I'm going to try and use this. I've used quite a lot of the movement and exercises that you've put out there. With my powerlifters, with my clients, and it works. And the whole thing of, sometimes telling people okay, let's strip the weight down a little bit. We don't have to go crazy heavy all the time. And a prime example of, strength training and using barbells throughout your life. There's a guy that I trained when he first came in. He's got 2 young daughters, and he couldn't play with them. It was just, his back was aching or his hips were aching. But then, just over this summer, he took them both on holiday, and he was playing around. He was going on the climbing frames, and it was, it doesn't have to be. He never deadlifts from the floor. He does a block pull. He uses a safety bar squat for a squat, but he's still deadlifting. He's still squatting, still doing strength training, and we do focus on his movement. And to see that progression, I think that's awesome. See his face when he's like, took my kids on the playground the other day, and it was really, really good. I completely agree. It's great to see that.
Yeah.
So obviously you were chatting there about obviously the physical therapy side of things and a coach. So how often do those cross over, and what are your thoughts on people out there who flip too far the other way? So they are a physical therapist, but they try and do too much coaching, or they're a coach and try and do too much physical therapist. What are your thoughts on people knowing their limits and their knowledge base?
Yeah, it's a good idea. The thing is to always educate yourself to know sort of the other side, the other side of thing. If you're a strength and conditioning coach, I think it's a good idea to immerse yourself to a bit in physical therapy language, jargon, small fixes. When you have an athlete, they have a little bit of knee pain, it's a good idea to have the understanding of how to fix it, because your first go-to shouldn't be, no pain, no gain, just keep on going with it. As a physical therapist, you're seeing athletes that are injured. That's the reason they're coming to you. And then as they get back to a point to where they are healthy, having the understanding of how to program in the basic strength lifts into that end range of physical therapy can get to the point to where that athlete is then being released back to knowing they can do those lifts, and not saying, all right, you're good. Because this is what happens in the physio world, the physical therapy world a lot. You get an athlete, for example, they're coming through knee pain, and they get back and you're like, all right, let's run. Let's do a couple jumps. Let's squat this 40 kilo or 20 kilo, kettlebell.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you're good. Just go, you're released. what if that person was a competitive power lifter or a weightlifter? They never even once touched a barbell. The amount of physical therapy clinics I've walked into that don't have a barbell, 90%.
Yeah.
Minimum 90%. There's so many. There's no barbell. So that athlete has never done any hard training in physical therapy. That's still physical therapy, is training you to get back to that point. So I think more so from my standpoint, because I've been in the physical therapy world for so long now, coming up on my 7th year, since graduating with my doctorate, I've seen more so the need for physical therapists to understand strength and conditioning principles so that they can effectively hit that last little bit of rehabilitation to let their athletes go. I've seen athletes after a torn ACL that have been discharged from their clinic a few weeks after learning to run again.
Wow.
And they've never done any high level agility or anything like that. Now, whether that's an insurance issue, because that obviously has to be taken into account, especially in the US where we have the most god awful, insurance issues going on right now. Or the physical therapist doesn't know how to do high level agility work with that ACL person, that's a potential as well. I think so. That's probably the issue we see on the physio side of things. On the strength and conditioning side of things, we see the no pain, no gain, I think, too often. And the person that's got back pain, we'll just throw some icy hot or some capsaicin cream on your back and you'll be fine. You'll feel better. Just keep on pushing. So I think that side of thing is understanding what is the fatigue of training and what is pain and what needs to be understood between the two. Because I think when you push through pain for too long, I'm sure many people saw the recent Ronnie Coleman documentary that's on Netflix.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty cut and dry. The dude trained his ass off for so long and didn't pay attention to things that were hurting him. And that's what happens, as sad as it is. Now, I mean, people are saying, well, he may not have ever gotten the results had he not trained so hard. And who knows, yes, he trained real hard and he needed that, but who says he wouldn't have gotten it had he taken a week here to deload a little bit or to, the little achy back. I think when you're talking about extreme performance athletes, there's always that risk. I think someone told me the other day, it's like you're playing tag with the dragon's tail. You never know when you're going to get bit. Yeah. When you're a high-end performance athlete. But to a point, you need to be smart about the way in which you're training. And if you continuously push through pain and go, as hard as you can, pedal to the metal every single day, eventually it will catch up to you because everyone is a human. Yeah. And no one can beat basic human physiology of when you train hard, pedal to the metal day in and day out, eventually your body breaks down. Yeah. So that I think is the advice to the strength and conditioning side of things is knowing the individual's end point of when it's appropriate to take a step back. I had a post on Instagram the other day, and it was saying that proper progression is a mixture of recovery and training. You need both. If you train hard all the time and go hard, your body will end up broken. Yeah. If you only recover and do corrective exercises that you see on Instagram all the time, you're never going to reach your true potential of what's out there performance-wise. You need both. Now, that mixture is different for everyone. Some people, for example, on a progression, obviously when we're talking programming, you're looking at natural fluctuations and wave-like patterns of volume and intensity based on whatever program you're doing, whether that's like a linear, more of an undulating, depending on your years of history in the gym. Everyone's program is going to be different, but it's usually fluctuations in volume and intensity. Some people can build, maybe 4 weeks in a row before they need a little bit of a back off deload week. Some people could go longer. Some people need shorter. But having a coach and strength conditioning professional that understands the individuality of that and when it's appropriate to back off is huge, because that's going to help allow that athlete to reach their performance potential without becoming injured and having to go see eventually that physical therapist.
Yeah, the quote there where you said everyone's a human. There's guys that have come into the gym that are just beat up. I've had consults with people that are just beat up. I've been, and been to, because I compete in powerlifting myself, seeing people, and it's like, oh, I got a PB on my squat, but I can't reach down and tie my shoelaces. It's a little bit like, be a little, exactly how you said, be a little bit smarter about it. There was, I was reading on Eric Cressy's blog, and he took a quote from a coach that he worked with, and it was about pain. I think he posted it in the last couple of days, and he said, listen to pain when it's a whisper, don't then take action when it's a yell. I might have got that quote wrong, but the idea is that if there is a little bit of pain, I say to anyone, my powerlifting club is going to test their 1 rep maxes tonight. There's been a couple of people that have had a few niggling injuries, and as soon as it starts affecting their everyday life, go see someone that can help with that. I've given them exercises, stretches, activations, little exercises to help. Okay, it's still aching. Go see someone who's going to be able to help with that issue. And when you're saying about as well, there's too much recovery, too much no pain, no gain. I think it's okay to refer out to people that have better or greater knowledge in that area. There's been 2 physios that have, there've been a number of physios that have worked at the gym that I work at, and there's only 2 of them that I would refer people to, because exactly what you've said, they've trained themselves. They have an idea of, okay, so can you squat with a barbell on your back? Nope. Right. So let's take our time a little bit, and we'll go from there. And I think that's exactly why I wanted you on as a guest, because you're saying the things that I saying to have someone of your experience, to reiterate the things that I've taken from you is awesome. So in terms of that, then talking about the crossing physical therapist and coaching, what should people be looking for if they are going for a coach, or if they have some niggling injuries for a physical therapist? What should people be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is looking for a physio or physical therapist that has a background in working with athletes. I mean, you can drive down any, road in the US and find a strip mall that's got a basic outpatient physical therapy. That doesn't mean that person understands treating athletes at all. Most of the time, they're probably, 60% or more treating, people who are over the age of 65 years old, who have total knees and an achy shoulder or back pain, but that doesn't mean that they're experienced at all in treating the high-end athlete. Obviously we have the amazing internet nowadays, so you can do a simple Google search and just be like sports physical therapist or sports physiotherapist near me, and see what pops up, and then call the place up and just ask them, what's your experience? Who do you work with? What's your background? A lot of times with social media nowadays, you're finding that many practitioners have their own blogs, their own websites, so you can sort of see what they're about and read up on them a little bit. But finding an athlete or a clinic that specializes in sports rehabilitation, I think, is key, because you don't just want your run-of-the-mill, not to downplay, other practitioners, but, when you're wanting a certain skill set, you don't just go to a basic general practitioner. Go to the skilled clinician. If you have heart disease, you go to a cardiologist. You don't go to a dentist. you got to find the exact specialty. So when you're talking a sports injury, it's very important to find a clinician that understands the rigors and the demands of the sport and are going to treat you as such.
Yeah, I think when people say, "Oh no, there's a physio that I use," it's exactly how you say. Usually, they're just dealing with general population of people who might not train. So yeah, that's a great point for people going to look for a person in their specialist area. So going into the main bulk of what I wanted to chat about today. I deal with a lot of powerlifters and a lot of people that compete in strength training. There are a few weightlifters that cross over and pop into the powerlifting club, and vice versa. And the main 2 issues that a lot of people have brought up is hip pain and knee pain. So I'll start off with hip pain. Okay. What are the majority of people have had hip pain during squatting, and I've not seen it in conventional, but sometimes in sumo deadlifting. So what are the actual causes of that? Why does that usually happen?
Good question. I think it depends where the injury is at. So when we're talking about the hip, we can sort of break it up into three different positions. We can go posterior side, so more of the back side of the glutes. We can go lateral hip, and then we can go more on the front side of the groin. And each are going to have different types of injuries that present there. If we're talking about more in the weightlifting and powerlifting side of things, especially with a wider set stance, I think you're going to more so run into issues with hip impingement, or FAI, femoral acetabular impingement. If you look at the hip socket and the way it's designed, it's almost a ball in socket joint. So the hip socket is a nice deep plunger-like setup, and you have the femur that sits in nice and and round inside that and moves freely. Well, not everyone has natural textbook anatomy. The hip socket and the neck of the femur, the way in which your thigh bone connects to it, can be angled at different manners. So you can have people that have a hip socket that angles open more forward. You can have people that have a hip socket that angles open more to the side. So that would be anteversion or retroversion. Now, when that happens, that's going to automatically change the stance you take. Because if you do not, and let's say, for example, someone has a good amount of retroversion, meaning they have a more lateral or flat angle, either setup of their femur or their acetabulum, that is going to dictate a more toed out stance. That's just the natural way in which the body is set up. So if that person was told toes straight forward when you squat, they're going to be pulling their femurs and angling them in from the natural out angled position that they were formed in their anatomy wise. What that's going to do is close off the available motion that is available to the femur as it rotates in the hip socket, leading to early pinching or smashing together of the front side of the femur and the acetabulum, which leads to that impingement. Now, the impingement over time, it's two things smashing together. That eventually can lead to a growth of bone either on the front side of that hip socket or on the front side of the femur. Those bone spurs can eventually rub on the labrum and create a labrum tear. Now, what you'll usually feel with this is a pinch or a block sensation in the front side of the hip. Now, that can happen first, like I said, due to anatomy. It can also happen due to weak or uncoordinated glute muscles. This side of your hip is a small muscle called your glute medius. Now, a lot of people, if you look at the anatomy textbooks or kinesiology textbooks, it will label the glute medius as an abductor of the hip, ABD. Yeah. So what that means is it kicks the leg away from the midline of the body in a lateral motion. Well, that's not 100% true. Yes, it does assist in that. But if you actually look at all the available research, the TFL muscle on the front lateral side of the hip, the TFL is actually a much stronger abductor of the hip than the glute medius. Okay. We find that the glute medius is not one flat muscle. It's not just one thick muscle. It's actually got three compartments. And the different compartments all have different actions in the way in which it imparts a force on the femur and the pelvis. The glute medius is very similar in action to the rotator cuff muscles of your shoulder, in that its main job is to stabilize and centralize the femur in the socket as it moves and keep the pelvis level. So if you think about it, as your thigh rotates up, so you drop into a deep squat, your thigh comes towards your chest, your femur rotates in the hip socket. The glute medius keeps the femur rotating right in the middle of the socket. If the posterior and lateral portions of the glute medius are not firing correctly, whether it's pure strength or just coordination issue, not turning on at the right time or maintaining a certain amount of tension, the femur can start rotating and translating forward. So it can start moving off axis inside the hip socket. And that can, again, lead to a forward translation and smashing or impingement on the front side of the hip socket. So when we're looking at athletes who are complaining of sort of that pinch or block sensation, pain in the front side of their groin, whenever they get into a deep squat or get down into a deep pulling stance to then, if you're doing a sumo pull, getting down into that deep stance just to initiate the pull, one of the first things I'm looking for is it an impingement? I'm also looking for, is it anatomy? Something we may not be able to fix, obviously, short of surgery, but I may be able to just tweak their stance a little bit. For example, if that athlete has taken a wider set stance, maybe bringing them in a little bit, or maybe having them have a little bit more angled toe out position, maybe, open their hips up a little bit and allow for a little bit more freedom of range of motion at the hip joint. Or is it a coordination issue and strength issue? So I'll be doing, some different specific muscle tests to find out, oh, you have a very uncoordinated or weak glute medius and posterior glute max on that right hip. We need to do some specific corrective exercises to improve that strength and coordination, which will then help centralize the femur in the socket during that stance and will fix the issue. So you sort of have to look at things very differently and always be digging for more information. Again, someone's coming to you for the first time with an injury. It's non-surgical. We need to investigate and find why is it there. Pain on the front side of the hip could be a couple different things. You could have a sports hernia. You could have a hip flexor strain. You could have an adductor strain or a groin strain. You could have this FAI. So you need to sort of figure out and differentiate which one is it. So that's sort of a lot of the things I've been really trying to put out on Squaw University recently is not a dumbed down version, but a simplified version of how a clinician would go about finding that. Because I don't think it's necessarily something that you should only have to go to a practitioner to find out. If you're dealing with this on your own, you should have the empowerment knowledge to figure that out. Someone just has to talk to you in your own language. And unfortunately, too many clinicians now, we talk down to people. We say, you want to find that out? Pay me $100 to come to my clinic and we'll figure it out.
It's like a couple of people have said who've gone to a physical therapist. It's a little bit like they've been told that they've got a dysfunction or a disease or something like that. It's all very white coats and we'll assess you, but you've got to charge for that. Looking at a couple of points that you mentioned there, I look at people's squat stance first, and as well on the sumo stance in deadlift to see what they're like. And sometimes I will change their squat stance. The way I use is lying down on the back and just seeing their movement and seeing lifting their knee up and just moving their knee to see where their squat stance might be. What I find interesting though is when people come to train and they've got a little bit of a hip pain, obviously they're still squatting in that squat stance. But once you do a little bit of an assessment, it actually realizes that their squat stance should be a little bit different. The sumo stance might be a little bit different. Is the fact that they're squatting like that because they haven't been coached properly, or how have they come about using that squat stance when looking at biomechanically, they need the feet a little bit wider or something like that? So how do people come to that conclusion of, so I should be squatting like this, I'll squat like this all the time, but it's causing a little bit of hip pain?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times people, when you first say, all right, do the squat, they're going to sort of do what seems natural or what they've maybe been coached to do. If you only are around Olympic lifters, you probably only take a very, narrow, not narrow, but relatively narrow shoulder width stance when you're squatting. If you've been around a lot of power lifters before, a lot of power lifters take a little bit wider stance. So I think naturally you're just going to sort of start off in what you have seen before and what you may seem as natural. And it's not until you started playing around with other things that you're like, oh, actually, I feel a little bit more comfortable with this stance, or I'm able to squat deeper with this stance and feel less pain. So when it comes to stance width, I think it's definitely a very guess and check kind of thing when it comes to the pure squat carryover. When we're talking about Olympic weightlifting, obviously, if we're trying to excel in Olympic weightlifting, we want to try to have our squat stance mimic as much as possible the receiving position for the snatch and clean. So it's rare to see an Olympic weightlifter take a very wide stance on their squat just because there's not really much carryover unless you're catching your cleans or snatches that wide. But as far as powerlifting specific, we're going to want to find the stance that you feel the most strong and the most pain-free in.
Yeah. Another topic that or another question that I would ask, is what's their current program looking like if someone's coming over from another gym, and they are having a little bit of hip pain, looking at what their current programming is. So is it sometimes a case of actually it's just a little bit of overuse? What's actually in their program is a little bit too much. Have you found that's the case as well?
I definitely think you have to look at the program, because if you've done, your research enough on that athlete, a thorough history always requires you to understand the training paradigm that they're in at the time. If a person is doing a ton of exhaustive, high endurance stuff or very high intensity stuff, I think they're going to be a little bit more prone to other types of injuries. For example, like a hip flexor strain or an adductor strain. Those are probably going to come out, likely when they're doing a ton of intense, high level activity work, where the body's just got a lot of tension running through it. If things start breaking down, usually the muscles are going to be something that, are going to be the first to go, or a tendon. But, depending on whether or not they've had a history, for example, a tendon injury, like if you have a hamstring tendinopathy, those are going to be more prone to injury whenever you have a spark of unexpected stress or load. Let's say you had someone that went on a vacation for 2 weeks, didn't do any training, jumped right back into their high-end activity training. And then the next day they're like, holy crap, my hamstring tendon just flared up like crazy.
Yeah.
That makes sense. You had an issue with unexpectedly overloading your hamstring tendon. Tendons respond to load. They speak the language of load. So if you overload them, no matter if you're an elite athlete or an amateur athlete, if you overload it at a certain point, it will become angry and flared up.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think definitely understanding the type of training they're doing can be helpful in modifying things.
Yeah. I think when he's sitting down and chatting to people and, they've had a little bit of time off and diving straight in, I think the main thing that I try and get across is just have a little bit of patience. Just, there's no need to rush. Like what we started speaking about at the start, you've got all the time in the world, longevity of training. You can get back to that point, but listen to your body. Just take that time.
I think so many athletes are fearful that they will lose their gains when they take a few weeks off or deload for a few weeks. You got to think big picture. You will not lose your gains if you take time off, and in fact, doing so may be one of the best things for your body. Yeah. Me personally right now, I've got some little posterior elbow issue I'm dealing with on my right side that started flaring up the last 2 weeks of my last program that I was on. And I took a deload week and it's still not feeling great. I've got a 4-week program I'm jumping into right now before the holiday season coming up. I'm not doing full snatches for the next couple of weeks. And it's inside I'm frustrated. I'm like, oh, why is it not, why I can't do snatches for the next couple of weeks. But then I'm thinking, I constantly have to remind myself, it's okay.
Yeah.
Work on what you can work on. Fix the issue at hand. It's going to be okay. You're not going to lose all your gains. All your strength isn't going to magically melt away. Train what you can train while you fix what you can fix. And that way you'll keep your body forever.
Yeah. Yeah, I must admit, I competed this September. I went from one competition prep straight into another competition prep. And I just, after that, I just felt really beat up. So my coach just gave me, it was mainly just dumbbell work and loads of, the recovery side of things, like we mentioned about before. And I was thinking, what's going to happen when I come back to using the barbell? Will I forget how to squat? Don't get me wrong. After a month of just stepping away from powerlifting a little bit, it was quite refreshing doing something a little bit different. But when I came back, my squat was still fine. I just felt a lot fresher. But at the time, we've just got to suck it up and just think, right, let's just crack on with this. Yep. So still talking about the hip, do you have any go-to exercises or programming elements that you would recommend people doing before the training or on the recovery days for that long-term health if they are having issues?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of 2 exercises, the bridge and the side plank clamshell. So the bridge, obviously laying on your back, or you can do sort of the hip thruster, which is, I guess you would say, sort of a progression where your back is elevated on a bench and doing a bridge from there. Yeah. But I think the bridge is huge because you're isolating the glutes in a way that's not as isolated with other more functional exercises like a deadlift. So you're getting those to turn on. A lot of times we think our glutes are working correctly because we're doing squats and deadlifts with good technique. Sometimes they can actually, especially if you are in pain. If you are in pain in your hip, your glutes are often a problem. It's called neurogenic inhibition or arthrogenic inhibition. And basically your different hip muscles can turn off and fall asleep in the presence of pain. Now, it doesn't mean they're just not functioning.
Yeah.
They're still there. You're still standing upright. They're just not turning on at the right time and maintaining correct tension for the desired movement that you're doing. Yeah. It's a coordination problem. So for example, I always tell people to do like a single leg bridge exercise and pick your hips up and hold it for a couple seconds and determine what muscles are working the hardest to keep your hips up. If it's not your glutes, there's something wrong.
Yeah.
If your hamstrings are cramping or your back hurts or your quads are burning really good, your glutes aren't working as they should be. You need to get those to turn on. So a double leg bridge is awesome. A side plank clamshell is also another one. I demonstrate this constantly on my website. I feel like sometimes I do it too much, but it's that good of an exercise.
Yeah.
You got a resistance band loop around your knees. You get into a modified side plank off your knee, and you do a clamshell where you sort of open your hip up and hold it for a couple seconds and back down. If you're doing that correctly, you're definitely going to be feeling your glutes, lateral glutes working really hard. Those are 2 exercises I do weekly.
Yeah, I feel like I just had a live version of you put a podcast out there naming those same exercises. I was listening to that on my phone. Then I recommend those to the guys that come to the powerlifting club. So that's good to know that I ain't going too far wrong using those 2 exercises. On that similar note, just mainly for my own peace of mind, I also add in banded crab walks, or they might be called monster walks. And I'll either have the band around their knees or the band around the top of the feet. And I'll also use banded straight leg abductions. What are your thoughts on that? Are they?
Love them.
Yeah. Okay.
Love them. Yeah, I do band walks and the single leg kick out to the side all the time. I think those would be my next 2.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Oh well, that's not too bad then. So yeah, happy with those. So any of my powerlifters watching, you're still going to be having those exercises before training. So moving on to the next main issue that I have quite a lot of people chat about is knee pain, and that is usually within the squat. I've had a couple of people that have mentioned it in the when they deadlift sumo, but actually it turned out it's from other things that they have done. It's not necessarily just from doing too much sumo. So again, what are usually the causes of knee pain during the squat?
Well, there's a couple of different reasons that someone would develop knee pain during squats or deadlifts. I think what you're referring to, if the pain comes out during a specific type of lift, I think it's going to be more so a biomechanical dysfunction, which is a very fancy way of you've got a technique problem. Yeah. Your knees are wobbling around too much. That's one of the if you look at patellofemoral pain syndrome, that's sort of the blanketed term that could be, there's a few different subcategories of knee pain. Biomechanical dysfunction, you have a problematic movement pattern. That's one of the most common ones, especially in strength trained athletes. If you think about your kneecap, your knee, the patella moves along the femur like a train moves on a train track. Yeah. And it's got a bunch of different attachments from different muscles and fascia, which is like a spider web of connective tissues that run across. If there are imbalances in the way in which those are pulling due to problems in the way you are moving, you're going to get that patella is going to start moving differently. Yeah. And you're going to get pain either rubbing on the underside, which could be sort of a compression issue, or it could be creating sort of a pull one way versus the other as far as too much tension on different tissues, which is going to create pain. But basically, your knee's not staying in a good alignment, and different tissues start getting angry. It's a very easy way to think about it. So the biggest thing you need to think about is fixing technique. Either A, we need to drop down weight until you're able to do it with good technique, and we need to sort of hammer that down. I love using tempos. So if you're having a squat tempo issue, whereas, after 60%, 70, 80%, your technique starts breaking down, you drop too fast, your knee caves in, your back rounds, doing tempos at lighter weight, maybe a 3 to 5 second eccentric, a pause at the bottom, a fast or even a slow descent, whatever you programming wise need, that can be very helpful. A big thing that I love to program is single leg work. I think too often as strength athletes, we get enamored with the double leg strength exercises because those are our competition exercises. We do deadlifts, we do squats in competition. Well, why would I ever do a single leg squat? I don't ever do that in competition. I promise you, if you don't have the ability to do a single leg squat off at least a height of a few plates stacked on top of each other, so 6 to 10 inches, you have an issue in dynamic knee control that is a major weak link glaring you in the face. That is the reason behind your knee pain. I've had so many athletes that are very strong, squatting kilos on top of kilos, and they cannot do a good single leg squat. And that is the why behind their knee pain. They think they have good knee control, but whenever you take the facade away and get them into a single leg stance, their knee wobbles around like crazy. The small weak link in dynamic knee control was barely visible in a double leg stance. It was an invisible weak link until I pushed you into a bad position and caused you to expose that weak link. So single leg training, for example, off a box, like a single leg touchdown exercise, is one of my go-tos for almost every type of knee pain. You're hinging at the hips. You're learning how to stay balanced. You keep your knee in line with your body. Keep your foot nice and grabbing the ground, a very stable foot. You have to think about the foot so you get people out of their shoes whenever they're doing this. Tap the ground, come back up. Single leg squats are a must in every person's program.
Yeah. Why I'm smiling to myself is that, in the time I had off after competition, I did have quite a lot of single leg work program. I've still got a little bit of single leg work programmed on there, and I like to think I've got a pretty decent squat. Give me some lunges, single leg squats. Yeah, it's surprising how challenging they are. A funny story. One of the coaches that I work with, he runs the athletic performance side of things in the gym, and he was saying, "Oh, you've got a pretty good squat. Let's see what you can split squat." I was shaking all over the place. I was thinking, "Hang on a minute. I thought my legs were quite strong." That's definitely something that I've been looking a little bit more into, more so because it was highlighted from myself, but I've not necessarily looked at that with other people. Mentioned there about taking shoes off and doing it in bare feet. How much does the ankle and the foot play a part in maybe possibly causing knee pain? Because the thing at the minute that I've been trying to read up on a little bit more is sort of an active arch and a lazy arch, and maybe not being able to screw your feet into the floor a little bit, and as well sort of the range of movement you have in your ankle. How much does that play a part on knee pain? Because I think that's for me a thing that I think is sometimes overlooked by people.
It plays a huge part. The foot is sort of the foundation, the base of the pyramid. And if your foot is not stable, everything else up the rest of the chain will never be as stable as it can be. Yeah. Your foot, it should be broken down into like a tripod. You got your base of your heel, your base of your first toe, base of the fifth toe. And if those points are not equally in contact with the ground whenever you are performing any type of movement, you're going to find issues all the way up the chain. The ankle needs to be mobile. When we find that an athlete lacks ankle mobility, it will limit how far the knee can translate further forward over the toe. So specifically in a squat, if someone has limited ankle mobility, you're going to see breakdowns of like the knee caving in. That can be a huge issue with that. So we always need to look at the joints above and below the site of pain to find out what contributions those joint complexes are giving, either aiding or hindering the knee or the joint in question. Yes. So you definitely need to look at foot stability and ankle mobility. Yeah. For that reason, I think that corrective exercises often should be performed without shoes on, so you can very much so hammer down that foot stability.
Yeah, it's become a little bit of a standing joke really for some of my sessions. Some of the people that have trained me for a while, they'll walk into the session and they'll take the shoes off. And yeah, when new people rock up, it's a little bit, have I joined a little bit of a cult, or what's going on? But once you start talking about it a little bit more, yeah, that's definitely something that I've tried to work on a little bit. And again, I find that quite interesting. So again, similar to the hip pain, you mentioned about the single leg exercises. Is there any go-to exercises for long-term knee health that you would add in the movement prep, as well as sort of the single leg exercises that you've used?
So the things we already talked about, like the bridges and side plank clamshells, band walks, and lateral kicks out to the side, standing on one leg, those are huge because, again, the hip controls the knee too.
Yeah.
So we need to understand the hip contribution and train a lot of those. I would love single leg squats, and these don't need to be necessarily weighted, just, repetition. I think everyone should be able to do one off at least about an 8-inch high box. Mm-hmm. As far as other exercises, I like Bulgarian split squats. I think that's another good one as well. But I think the basics of what we already added in with the hips, I think will have great carryover to the knee as well.
Okay. So going on to a little bit of a separate topic in its own right, really. Obviously, you've mentioned there quite a lot of exercises. The one thing that you haven't mentioned is necessarily either stretching or foam rolling. Now, I've looked at the research on that. Quite a lot of people have chatted about it. Do you add that for the clients that you work with? Do you recommend it? Do you use it? What are your thoughts on it?
So I think stretching and foam rolling need to be used on an individual basis. I think stretching can be great for someone who has very stiff and spasmed muscles at times. I think the dose is going to be dependent upon how bad it is. If someone is extremely, extremely stiff in a certain muscle group, using stretches for long duration can be great. Now, automatically, when you stretch a muscle for a very long duration, you do a 1 to 2 minute length stretch, naturally, directly after, you're going to have a decrease in performance that muscle can exude power and strength. So if we're doing very long duration stretches directly before training, we're probably not going to have amazing performance. Mm-hmm. But maybe that person's going to benefit more so because they're going to get in better technical positions now. So we always have to, it's not in black and white. It's always, it depends. It depends. Does that person need long duration stretching? Does that person need short duration stretches because they're just a little stiff, and some small short duration stretches could benefit them? For example, I'm working currently with Kelly Branton, powerlifter up in Canada, whose goal is to squat 1,000 pounds, and he's having issues in hitting full depth. His ankles are very stiff. I don't want Kelly to do very long duration stretches prior to getting under the barbell. So we did some short duration stretches, like 5-10 seconds in length, multiple ones, and then retest his squat. And he felt like he was able to get deeper, but still have that springiness out of his lower body. Yeah. So it's always on an individual matter. As far as foam rolling, the same sort of thing applies. It's individual to the person. Can foam rolling be helpful at improving joint range of motion in the short term? Yes. Research is unequivocal. Yes, it can be helpful in some people. Does that mean we need to spend 20 minutes foam rolling before every session? No. It's probably a waste of your time. I think people make statements like, you should never foam roll, it's useless. Like when you make black and white statements, like, I'm sorry, like you have to be a scientist. A scientist knows, a researcher knows that there's very few absolutes. Yeah. And even the absolutes that we do know, we have to understand that someday that may be broken. That's what science is. Hundreds of years ago, people were very absolute that the world was flat. According to social media, there's still some people that think that, according to one of my last posts. But, we have to understand that there's some things that, you have to take an individual approach. Yeah. If someone has limited ankle mobility and they cannot get into a deep squat, and then I have them do 5 for 10-second calf stretches and foam roll their calves, and they find some stiff spots, and we foam roll for a minute, and they get back under the barbell and they're able to squat with much better technique, I think that's a good intervention for that person.
Yeah.
For someone that comes in and they have a great looking squat at the beginning and no calf stiffness, I'm not going to have that person foam roll. I'm not going to have that person stretch.
Yeah.
It always is individual to the person. That's where having a good coach comes in, you know? But yeah, I think foam rolling, the last meta-analysis, peer-reviewed, whatever article, I think it was, I'm trying to remember who wrote it, but it's recent in how long it came out ago, but it was very unequivocal. We know that foam rolling can induce short-term changes in mobility for some people, and it can be great in helping with delayed onset muscle soreness. So if someone's super, super sore after weight training 2 days later, foam roll for a little bit over those areas, and it can be helpful. It doesn't improve performance. It does not decrease performance. That's another flawed thing. But yeah, I think for some people it can be helpful.
Yeah, I kind of feel sometimes when I get asked that question, people get fed up with me saying it depends. So for everyone listening, you've heard it here from Aaron. That's absolutely no more questions on that.
The answer, it depends, is uttered so many times throughout my day with questions that I get. You know, people are like, you know, can I do this exercise when I'm dealing with this pain? It depends. I don't know. I have to do a little bit more digging. You know, if you have two people and they're twins and they both have knee pain, one person may respond very differently to a certain treatment. One person may respond very differently to another treatment. Like, it depends on so many different factors.
The next part of this chat is going to be quite interesting then, because I shared on my story. Obviously, there's quite a lot of interest that you were going to be coming on as a guest. Obviously, the content that you put out there answer quite a lot of questions. So I randomly picked quite a few questions. There was a question posted in my Facebook group, and there was quite a few questions posted on the Instagram story. So I've picked a few. Let's see how many times you can say it depends. It depends on this one. So the first one, this is a guy that actually trains down at the gym that I work out, and it's a little bit of a double-barreled question. So, to what extent do you think long limb length is detrimental in strength sports, and what alterations would you suggest to accommodate limb length?
Great question. So when someone has, again, when you say long limbs, it's sort of you have to break it down, because long limbs doesn't necessarily mean that person, sometimes people say long limbed when they just mean a tall person.
Yeah.
Classically, when people mean this, I think you're meaning someone who has very long femurs compared to their torso length.
Okay.
What that's going to do is change their technique during motions like the squat. So when we view the squat from the side, we want the barbell to track directly over the middle of the foot. That means the body is in balance and capable of producing efficient force and power. When you have someone with very long femurs relative to their torso length, so a shorter torso, they will have to have a more inclined chest position in order to stay balanced and keep that barbell over the midfoot. Now, when you have that much of an incline, it's going to put more stress and torque on the low back and hip. Mm-hmm. So for some people, they may benefit more so from having a low bar back squat, because if they're high bar back squatting, that means they're going to be very tipped forward. So if they roll that barbell down their back just a little bit, they may be able to be a little bit more upright. If you look at research, there's a kinematic analysis of power lifters at a meet, elite and amateur, and they found that the most elite lifters that lifted the most weight were actually the most vertical trunk position during their squatting, which most people would say, oh, well, low bar lifters, they're more pitched forward. Yeah. Well, technically compared to a high bar, yeah. But the most elite power lifters are still very much more vertical than an elite or than an amateur athlete performing the same type of lift. So I would say there's two ways to go about this. The first, improve ankle mobility. The more ankle mobility you have, the more the knee can translate further forward over the toe, the more upright your trunk can be. Because the last thing we want to do is do a squat where you're folded over like an accordion.
Yeah.
That's going to put a lot of stress on your low back. So if we can modify that in any way, it's probably going to give you better leverage. If you cannot improve your ankle mobility to a great degree, or you just have maxed out your ankle mobility and you're still very much so forward, the second thing we can do is put on a pair of weightlifting shoes. A weightlifting shoe with a raised heel will, again, allow for more appearance of more ankle mobility, more knee over toe translation, more upright chest. Those are two modifications you can make along with switching to a low bar squat to put you in a little bit more of an advantageous position during your squat. And then again, just understand you're not going to have a squat like some of the Chinese lifters who are straight up and down in their front squat. Like you just have to understand individual anatomy dictates how your technique is going to look, and you need to try to make the most out of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Good answer. The next one is when during a back squat, the bar doesn't sit straight on my back. Does that matter? So what I'm guessing from that is it's a little bit of a slight angle. If it's who I think it is, I think they're going to come and test at Powerlifting Club tonight. So does it matter whether the bar isn't directly straight on the back? And yeah, for my own peace of mind, what could actually cause that?
Yeah, I would say it will long-term could create some issues because you're going to be unevenly holding those forces throughout your spine and your body. There could be so many different, again, it depends. There could be so many different issues that could be causing it. You could have an imbalance in your trap muscles, your rhomboids, the way in which your shoulder blades are moving. There could be some imbalances. Practical takeaway, go on squawuniversity.com, click on the blog article database, scroll all the way down. There's a blog article called How to Screen Your Shoulder Pain. And there's a number of different, very practical screens to sort of figure out different imbalances in mobility and stability that could help you sort of piece together what is going wrong and what may be the cause of that. But yes, long-term, we want to make sure that we're having a very even hold. Powerlifting and weightlifting are very symmetrical sports, ideally. If you are asymmetrical in the way you're holding your bar and the way one side is moving or the way you're moving the bar, eventually it can cause issues down the road.
Yeah. So just on that then, would it be, you mentioned there about long term, would it be later down the line that it might actually start causing pain? But you could be squatting with a slight slant on the bar and it might not cause pain for X amount of time.
Yeah, most injuries are not acute. There's rarely in terms of, overall looking at the injuries, you're rarely going to have one big injury in the sport of weightlifting and powerlifting. They're slow onset. They're achy injuries. You may start noticing it all at once, like, I just sort of, hurt my back a little bit. The cause was probably there for a while.
Okay. So moving on to question number 3, mentioning about weightlifting is included in this one. If you're not a weightlifter, do you need to be overhead pressing?
Oh, great question. I would say, how do you expect to put a box on a top shelf in your garage? I mean, overhead pressing is a functional movement for life, just like deadlifting is. Yeah. I mean, unless you're never going to reach your hands above your head or never, I mean, you take a little kid, you put them above your head when they're playing on a, jungle gym or something, you have to be able to move things above your head. Your shoulders were meant to move above your head. Yeah. I think if you don't train above your head, you're missing out on the potential of what your body's capable of in that manner as well.
Yeah. When I saw that, I found that quite interesting. I mean, I don't have, it's peaks and troughs that sometimes I have overhead pressing in my training. But I always use a neutral grip, just because obviously as a powerlifter, I'm doing quite a lot of benching. My shoulders don't like it when my arms are out to the side. So if I do program overhead pressing, I always program neutral grip as opposed to anything else. If you're a competitive weightlifter, yes, you need variations of that. But yeah, I don't think you could have summed that up any better than saying putting a box on a shelf. So the next question then, this will be quite interesting, seeing as though we've chatted a little bit about ankle stability and foot stability. Single leg deadlifts, balance is an issue. What would you recommend to help improve this?
That's actually a great question because that's going to be the topic of my blog post today. Well, we're single leg RDL is what I'm going to do a video on. But I would say drop the weight and take your shoes off.
Yeah.
I would say taking shoes off is huge because it's going to make you concentrate on what's going on at your feet.
Yeah.
It's going to make you feel for what's going on so that you can correct the imbalance, because often it stems from the feet. If you have an imbalance up your body and you don't know what's going on at your feet because you've always had shoes on, that's probably the weak link.
Yeah. Okay. And then two more to go. The next one is, what are your thoughts on belt, sleeves, and lifting shoes? Can they be used too much?
Yeah, sure. Definitely. I would say, all right, let's go with the last one, lifting shoes. Lifting shoes can be used too much if you never perform a squat without weightlifting shoes on. So for example, I always tell weightlifters, warm up without your shoes on, like, body weight squats, doing all your corrective exercises, whatever you're doing. Do just the barbell, do a few sets, not like explosive lifts that may hurt your feet as far as the pounding goes, but do a few squats without shoes on. Then when it's time to put weight on, strap your shoes on. But if you've never done any movements without your weightlifting shoes on, you may not know that you have limited ankle mobility.
Yeah.
Because you've never pushed your body into that end range position. I think they can be very helpful, but they should not cover up an issue.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Weightlifting belts. Weightlifting belts can definitely be used too much. I urge people to have belted and non-belted days in their training. I think too often people will use a belt every single rep all the way up. If you're going to use a belt, don't put it on until you're above 80% or more. Find sort of that cutoff on your belted days of lifting where you are able to create sufficient stability with your body's natural weightlifting belt. When you contract your core and brace your core correctly, your body was built with the weightlifting belt. It's all the muscles that surround your spine. When those are sufficiently stiffened, it creates stability in your core that you will not know if you only use a weightlifting belt every time you lift. So you need to create your body's natural weightlifting belt, use that to a high level, and then having a weightlifting belt at the heaviest weights can help you improve performance, but you should not over rely on it to get you there. Also, in saying that, I think it's important to have non-belted days to where you're lifting relatively heavy as well. Again, with the stipulation that you're using good technique and not allowing your body to break down, but you're learning how to push your body also without having to rely on the belt. So I usually have belted and non-belted days in my training.
Yeah.
Last thing I think was wraps or sleeves.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with most sleeves because sleeves are just there to keep your knees warm. Mm-hmm. Most sleeves. There are always those sleeves that are so tight to get on that they actually do provide a little bit of a mechanical advantage. Knee wraps, for those listeners out there, knee wraps are basically like wrapping a bungee cord around your knees. They give you an external bounce out of the bottom because of the elastic component to the rubber filaments inside the sleeves. It's like a spring being pulled back and then let go. If someone is wearing knee wraps correctly, they will instantly add pounds and kilos to their lifts. So in that case, because it's an external aid, it can definitely be used too much. You need to learn how to squat without them. If you are wearing extremely tight knee sleeves, and everyone knows which ones I'm talking about, which, are actually that tight to where they provide a mechanical advantage as well. Maybe not as much as wraps, but still very springy. Those need to be worn sparingly as well.
Yeah. Key point from there that I picked out is when you add all these things in, that it will help your lifts increase. It's not, I sometimes use the example of it's a little bit like supplements when you're having a protein shake or something like that. It never actually replaces real food. You still have to eat real food. You still have to squat without, a belt. You still have to squat. If you're sitting down on a sofa or sitting down on the loo, you don't put your lifting shoes on when you go and want to go sit down on the sofa. So yeah, I quite like that one.
Yeah, I mean, you can have the worst diet in the world, eating Doritos all day, but taking a few scoops of protein powder is not going to help you make your strength gains. Same sort of thing,
Yeah. So the last question then is, what are your go-to exercise to ease lower back pain and tightness?
The McGill Big Three. Plain and simple. Low back issues develop because we have instability in our back. We are moving it out of a neutral position and loading it in strength sports. And when you don't have sufficient stability and you move about your back and not about your hips, you overload parts of the spine that eventually break down. The McGill Big Three, from renowned spine expert Dr. Stuart McGill, 3 simple exercises: modified curl up, side plank, and the bird dog. And it hits the core in 3 sufficient ways that can help you create firm stability, activate your body's natural weightlifting belt, and help you, start the foundation of rebuilding your back. Do not stretch your low back. It may feel good for a second, but it is not the way to fix your back for most people.
Yeah. Okay. Not that many depends in those quickfire questions there. I really enjoyed that chat. I've been really looking forward to chatting with you and basically picking your brains on all the topics that I get asked as a coach. It's reassured me that I ain't going too far wrong with a couple of things and given me a couple of things to think about. For everyone listening who might want to follow the content that you put out there or have any questions or want to get involved in reading the Squat Bible, where can people find you and get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm available on almost every social media platform. Instagram, I think, is the largest one, where I make sure I put a new piece of content out almost every single day. But that's just under Squaw University. I'm on Facebook, Twitter. My blog website is where I try to upload new blogs, hopefully once or twice a month, depending on how long they are, squawuniversity.com. YouTube, I have my own podcast now, which I'm catching up to you. I'm only on episode 38, so not there yet. But yeah, so that's just called the Squaw University Podcast. Snapchat, Dr. Aaron Horschig. And then my book, The Squat Bible, is on Amazon.com all over the world.
Yeah. Absolutely awesome. For everyone listening, even if, I've used quite a lot of the content that you've put out there and it's really benefited my own training and benefited the people that I train. If you are listening and you're following any of the Squaw University content, definitely use what Aaron's putting out there. It is really, really beneficial. I hope everyone enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Thanks for taking the time, Aaron, to chat with me. And I will see you all next week.
Hey, thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate it.